Chris Graham and Vito Delucchi join me this week to discuss Thiols and tropical IPAs. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 274. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 274, and it's late January 2023. Chris Graham and Vito Delucchi join me this week to discuss Thiols and tropical IPAs. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers. They offer access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com to get your subscription today. And Blickman Engineering has been the pioneer of nano brewing. They've helped hundreds of successful breweries achieve their dreams. Starting with one-barrel systems back in 2006, they now are offering brew houses up to 15 barrels. They have cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and much more. Blickman Pro brewing systems are competitively priced without sacrificing quality. When you're ready to go pro, be sure to reach out to them at ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com. Again, that's ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com. And I recently updated the payment systems for BeerSmith to give you more options to purchase or renew our BeerSmith desktop and web-based software. You can now purchase 2- and 3-year licenses at a discount, and we offer Venmo and Square for non-subscription payments. I'll be announcing a BeerSmith 2 to 3 upgrade program shortly to make it easier than ever to upgrade. Check out our BeerSmith brewing software at beersmith.com. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Chris Graham and Vito Delucchi. Chris is the president of MoreBeer and has been brewing for over 20 years. Vito is MoreBeer curator of content. He's a BJCP certified judge and former Doe's president. It's great to have you guys on. Chris, so let's start with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been about a year now, hasn't it?
It has. It has. We both got a little more gray this year. Did you notice that?
I try not to look, but thanks for noticing.
I got it coming in on the sides here. But I'm glad you're doing well. And Vito, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Living the dream. Honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Vito is a first-time guest. Chris has been on many, many times. Well, Chris, why don't we start with you? Can you bring us up to date on what's going on at MoreBeer lately?
Cool. Yeah, well, been about a year since we've been on, and we started up kind of a new thing for us last year that we've been working on all year, and I think we're improving. We're getting a little better, but we've got a couple of YouTube shows. One is Free Beer Fridays, and the other is Vito's The Mashup, where we're kind of bringing interesting content, hands-on content with brewing, introduction to breweries that are local to us, that are interesting. So we've done that kind of stuff over the last year. So if you're interested, you can check it out on YouTube. But we've also had some cool products in the last year come out. We're carrying the Brew Tools line of products now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Mm-hmm.
Brewbill's X2 jacketed conicals are just starting to ship. Glycol units with those as well. Gen 4 Brewzilla, the tri-conical from Zilla, canning. It's all been really, really cool this last year.
That's awesome. And the topic for today actually came out of one of your short videos, right? We just we pulled one of the topics on. You were talking about thiols in particular.
Exactly, and one of the awesome things we've kind of set up and introducing Vito to your audience is Vito's worked here for I don't know how many years, Vito.
2017, I came on full time. Before that, I was teaching classes at the Concord showroom. And then I took a little hiatus, or was a commercial brewer for 2 years as well. So kind of off and on for like 9 years now or something. I don't know.
I was going to say, it's been a while. What I really enjoy working with Vito is, one, he always has a brewer's perspective on everything. And that's really cool. And two, now he has commercial experience. And that's a whole different world of getting things technically correct and understanding how they work. Most of us homebrewers can kind of just chuck something into a batch. Get lucky sometimes, get not lucky other times. But working with Vito has been awesome. And then he did a mashup episode with a brewery out of San Francisco called Bear Bottle, and they started talking about Thiols. And that's something we debate: is it Thiols or Thiols? And I don't think anyone's an expert enough to say which one it is yet. But he brought in the chemistry and the science and the understanding of how it works. So it's not just kind of this elusive thing. He was able to teach us and our customer base through a video. And that's why I thought when you reached out that would be a great subject to go over.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an advanced topic, but thiols are actually becoming very important, particularly for making a lot of the fruity IPAs that we're working on today. Vito, can you dive in and tell us a little bit about what they are and where they come from?
Yeah, so thiol is a chemistry term for a polyfunctional organosulfur compound. So it sulfur, our noses detect sulfur. It's very detectable. And then there's an organic compound part of it too. So they could have tons of different makeups. So it could go anything from fruit flavors to even coffee and garlic and things like that. So grain has precursors to thiols in it and stuff. So it's basically a sulfur compound and another organic compound that has gone through biotransformation to create this aromatic experience.
And they mostly come from hops, right?
Yeah, no, well, that's where a lot of the research is around and a lot of the talking points. But like I mentioned a minute ago, even grain has a ton of precursors to thiols in it, but mostly hops. And everything we're going to be talking about today is hop related.
Right. Yeah, we've had Stan Hieronymus on a couple times talking about thiols and how important they are and how they work with other compounds to biotransform and I believe create a lot of these fruity IPA flavors.
Correct.
The tropical. I'm thinking of tropical flavors. Various tropical fruits and that kind of thing.
That's what's really popularized it lately is the tropical fruits. But it's an aroma with a sulfur compound and another organic. Depending on that organic compound, that's kind of the makeup of the aroma that you're sensing.
Right. And interestingly, this has been very popular in the wine industry for many years. They've known about them for years, and they've promoted them and worked to select grapes that do it and so on. Well, Chris, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was saying, wine yeast is one of the, and that's, when they started trying to, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but very popular in the wine industry. A lot of these products are grape-derived products that we're going to talk about.
Cool. Well, Chris, can you tell us what some of the advantages are of using hops that are high in thiols or have additives? We're going to talk, for example, about yeast and other additives you can use to boost the free thiols.
Yeah, I think we're going to kind of talk about there's three legs that we stand on when it comes to thiols and beer, and that is the hops we're choosing, and then the yeast we're choosing, and then there's this powder now called Phantasm, and there's some other ones out there, but that's by far the top one. And those three are kind of like the trifecta. I mean, obviously we've been using hops for years, so there's always been thiols in beer. We'll talk later, but different hops will give us different characters. But really we're trying to make this extreme aroma, and that aroma, as we all know, the olfactory glands, kind of make flavor for us. So that's really what we're trying to do with these things is just to build this huge tropical aroma.
Yep. And that gives that kind of a fruit bomb IPA flavor that's become very, very popular, at least here in the U.S.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Vito, a lot of the U.S. Hops, as well as the hops were derived from U.S. hops, including New Zealand and Australian hops, have high thiol content, and they also have other compounds. But the thiols are really important for generating this, whereas a lot of the European don't. So what are some of the things to look for, and when's the best time to add the hops so that you get this effect that we're talking about?
Yeah, so things to look for in. I think Yakima is starting to put in on their hop sheets. Before you had lineal, geranial, those kinds of things, but you're starting to get the thiol content, and I think they're expressing it through I can't pronounce it, mexoplexol
Okay.
Anyways, it's what the conventional wisdom of when you add them is the whirlpool. You want to do it and/or biotransformation hop. So at that point, after fermentation, the yeast are going to transform and free those thiols. So all these things we're talking about that are in the hops are precursors. But then there's a lot of conventional wisdom, whirlpool, active fermentation hopping is when you add them, and
So
some of the types.
that'd be dry hopping, like at high Kreuzen kind of a thing, or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. You want the biotransformation to happen. And that's really what's freeing these thiols is the yeast and an enzyme and a gene that's present in them. But there's new studies, and like we talked about earlier, this is all kind of new talk. There's a lot of studies around mash hopping and using them there as well. So like the enzymes that are happening in mash, and it's one thing I always, in a lot of my recipe development, homebrewing and commercial, I loved mash hopping and I love first wort additions. And I would always describe it as, it just comes out a little fruitier. I like the bitterness it adds. So there's studies coming around that data that's proving that you're creating a lot of these thiol precursors in the mash as well. Need to be careful on that because those are going to contribute to your bitterness, right? You got your IBUs. Once you start to boil and alpha isomerize those alpha acids, that you get bitterness. So, be careful on that end, but conventional wisdom is late, whirlpool and high Kreuzen biotransformation hopping.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting because I've recently got a lot more questions about mash hopping, and I was never a big fan of mash hopping because I didn't really think it did much good. But you're saying now that some of the new research says if you take some of these high thiol hops and add them in the mash, it's actually maybe beneficial.
Correct. Yeah. There's a lot of Yakima, and I think a lot of other places are producing data to support that. The high survivable early additions, mash hop, are actually contributing just as much, if not more, precursors than the later additions.
That's very cool.
But it's all it's very dependent on what you're trying to brew. Styles of beer. We're really talking about mostly New England IPAs, that style where, certain beers wouldn't benefit nearly as much from that. Obviously, we're not trying to elaborate these fruity flavors.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we're today, I guess we're primarily talking about fruity IPAs, New England IPAs, those kinds of things, right?
Exactly. I'm just thinking if someone's coming on and thinking, I should start mash hopping everything, you're not going to get a ton of benefit. And that's, Brad, you've been brewing a long time, and it's like, I think you and I have talked about mash hopping in the past, and neither one of us do it regularly. And I'm going to be honest, those aren't my favorite styles of beer, so I'm not brewing them myself often.
Yeah. Great point. It's IPAs, pale ales, these kind of things. We're trying to accentuate fruitier characters, so it's style dependent.
Right. Well, Chris, in addition to picking hops with thiols, you've got some specialized products that help free up thiols, and you mentioned one of them called Phantasm. It's a thiol booster. Apparently, it helps boost the thiol content. I mean, what is it actually, and how do you use it?
So it is derived from Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc grapes.
Oh, that's cool.
And Vito and I on our show opened it and tasted it, and my goodness, it tasted exactly like a grape and almost like a fruit roll-up. So we're thinking maybe it was freeze-dried or something. We're not quite sure how they make it, not trying to learn, the secrets of how they're making it. But it was really amazing that I wouldn't have expected it to taste just like a grape like that. We're typically using it in the whirlpool, so it's still warm or hot, depending on what temperature. I mean, hot, but not boiling hot.
Right.
And we're using a rate of about 1 to 2.5 ounces per 5 gallons. So not a tremendous amount, but the effects of it so far, and like we said, it's all new, and it's not something you and I are going to measure easily. But the effects are like 50 to 200 times boost in thiols when used with a thiolized strain. And that's insane. That is completely changing what you're smelling at those stages.
And the other cool thing is, as I understand it, this does help in the free thiols because you can start with a hop that has a lot of thiols in it, and in some cases, those, depending on the variety, it can be very hard to free those thiols up during the brewing process so they actually do anything, right, Chris?
That's exactly it. You're not actually creating anything new with this except for freeing them up. I think some people think this is a thiol powder, that you're adding additional thiols by adding them. All you're doing is allowing them to help with the biotransformation, to be available, to be free, to be uptake by the yeast.
And Vito, maybe you could comment on, the importance of actual free thiols versus just the, thiols that you might find in the original hops, how that plays in.
Yeah, so like we're talking about, there's the free, the aromatic, the volatile, it's ready to be smelt and tasted. Then there's the precursor, the survivable, and that's unlocked during biotransformation. So yeast are going to take in that survivable compound. In this case, we'll talk about phantasm, the grape one, and then I think it's the B-lyase enzyme within them will then biotransform and create, take that sulfur compound, bind it with this now organic compound, and create this, in phantasm's case, like this passion fruit guava aroma that on the back end after biotransformation.
And I mean, one of the things I also find interesting is thiols are just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of a portion of, percentage of the actual hop.
Yeah, it's just a tiny percentage. Some have more, but it is just a little tiny percentage that gets boosted and amplified via biotransformation.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you mentioned up front that you could get a further boost by picking certain yeasts, which are bred to enhance the fruity biotransformations that we're talking about. Can you talk about a few of the labs that are now providing some of these yeast strains, and maybe give us a couple examples?
Well, the first thing I'll say is most yeast is going to do some release of the thiol. So it's not like, oh my goodness, if I don't use one of these new fancy yeast, I'm not going to get any. But Omega has really been the pioneer in the homebrewing space of running with specific yeast, and they have 4 key ones right now, and it's funny because they're all involving space. I don't know how New England IPA and like space travel or space whatever has become like the theme of it, but Cosmic Punch, Lunar Crush, Star Party, and Hello Gazer are like 4 yeasts that are super hot right now as it pertains to that.
So those are their mainline yeasts that are available right now. Now, are there other labs working on this too?
Oh, I'm sure. I think White Labs has some coming out. I would be surprised if Y Yeast and others aren't following suit real soon.
Yeah. Well, Vito, there's only a few labs doing it this time. Are these genetically modified yeast? I mean, that was one of the concerns I had. Or are they bred selectively from natural yeast?
So there's I think both. My first experience with thiolized yeast was with Berkeley Labs, and so that was genetically modified. You can't get it available on a homebrew scale, but it was when I was commercial brewing, and that they're using CRISPR and actually genetically modifying it so that that IRC7 gene, that's the gene that promotes that is present and active. But I believe Omega, a lot of theirs are selective. So they're, I think their newest one is through genetic modification, but a lot of it is just selective breeding. Like I mentioned, there's a certain gene that they isolated and said, okay, that's what's doing this. And as Chris mentioned, most all yeast does some biotransformation, but now they've kind of isolated that and then bred up the ones that are boosting it, 500 times, et cetera.
Yeah.
When Vito was brewing this batch, it's before I even knew what a thiol was. And I remember him telling me about the website where he essentially was building his yeast, which was really trippy in terms of how he ordered it. Like he built like what he was making, and I felt like the yeast kind of was derived from that to be the best effect on the beer.
Yeah,
how does that work? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're not only modifying it to to produce higher thiols, but like VDKs to not produce diacetyl. In regards to, and I think Chris is talking about like the kettle sours. They have a sour yeast, Saccharomyces strain that's been genetically modified to produce lactic acid. But you tell them, what pH you want it to finish at, and what your starting gravity is, and and above my pay grade, but darned if it didn't finish right at that pH of what I ordered, which is crazy to me. It's like, wow, so it's
Is this is when you were doing the commercial
neat.
brewing, I assume?
Yeah, this was from Berkeley Labs, doing commercial brewing.
Huh.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. They're doing some amazing stuff, and just back to that Thiols one. So when I brewed with that, we did a little bit of hops on the hot side. Really didn't at that point in time, several years ago, didn't understand what was going on, and but smelling it, I mean, you'd swear there was fruit in there, passion fruit, guava, and you taste it. It's like a normal IPA, but because it's not. Some of that flavor comes through, but it's not fruited by any means. It's all aroma. And it was just crazy to me that like if you gave it to somebody, they'd be like, oh, there's fruit in there, and then when you taste it, you're like, oh, there's not fruit in there. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, Chris, we talked a little about using dry hops during active fermentation, which is another important technique that I think is predated some of this new stuff. But how does dry hopping during high Kreuzen or something like that help drive the transformation?
Well, you're like we've covered. You're aiding in that biotransformation, and by giving it at a certain timing, and a lot of this is like fairly new.
Yeah, it is.
And without a ton of experiments. And some of the experiments Vito and I have been talking about is, should we do trying this with a pressure fermentation versus a non-pressure fermentation to see if some of that is aided by not being able to escape as a volatile so much. So those are some things we want to kind of try. But yes, people are talking about much earlier, adding those hops earlier than waiting for everything to be done, the yeast to be settled out, and then adding those hops. But Vito recently, as a home brewer now, is playing with a recipe that it was his very first beer as a commercial brewer. Very first, Vito?
It was the second batch I brewed.
Okay.
But, yeah, I did because I did a lager first, and then to get that going in the tank. But then pale ale, one of my favorite styles.
So Vito's got this pale ale recipe. I love it. In fact, it's the one that Olin and I brewed in Alaska on a drift boat. We made that batch because we like it so much. But Vito has typically brewed it the same way commercially in homebrewing for years. But then this last batch, he used Phantasm in it because he's got a hop varietal that falls right into this. So Vito, tell us like what you were telling me the other day in terms of just the complete change in aroma.
Yeah, so it's a pale ale that I've brewed I don't know, hundreds of times, dozens of times, multiple dozens of times. So I'm very familiar with the flavor and aroma profile of it. And so I added Phantasm in the mash and in the whirlpool. Both those, just to kind of see what some of the stuff I'd been reading to say, added in the mash and added it in that. It's a 5-gallon batch. What came out on the back end, I mean, just dominated by guava passion. Just like the mosaic, some of these other things, the Idaho 7s in there, Strata, just kind of muted, and it was all like fruit. Like so, it really changed the aroma, which it changed the flavor as well quite a bit. So I want to say that it dominated. It was great. If you're going for that fruity, nailed it, 100%. And that was, I think it was 2 ounces for 5 gallons, 1 ounce in the mash, 1 ounce on, and I didn't use one of the Thiols yeast, just used, classic 001. But it was a fruit salad. I mean, there's huge passion fruit guava. So it was interesting to see that at work. So I want to try it now with just on the dry hop, and maybe even do a control 3 different batches. One with mash, one on the whirlpool, and one without, just to really kind of, and then taste that and see how the differences are. But from a beer that I know and love and am very familiar with, it completely changed it.
And are you, Vito, specifically talking about some of these beers you've been brewing? Are they primarily New England IPAs, or are you targeting more the fruity styles?
So no, not New England IPAs. I would call it, clear, so fine, but fruity, but also dank, piney. Kind of do a lot of things, but yeah, mostly clearer beers. What I'm into. I love a good hazy beer too, but These are more higher sulfite level, so a little crisper, not as high in chloride levels and things like that to make the that juicier. But that's just kind of the style of beer I'm doing. It's kind of taking some of the classic West Coast IPA and New England and kind of meshing them together in this marriage of old and new school techniques.
I mean, there's a lot of commercial IPAs that are on the what I would call the fruity IPA style, as opposed to New England IPA, I guess.
Yeah, a little more bitterness, a little kind of taken from both new school and old school. Yeah.
And how well do these yeasts, Vito, play with things like a New England IPA? Some of the techniques you use to get all the cloudiness and so on.
Yeah, so I mean, like with this, I think this is Phantasm, these Thiols, what you're doing with the later mash, with the later hopping is right up the New England style alley. Like I said, you could use it in some of the other classic style, and that's the beauty of brewing and home brewing, is creating new things and kind of just taking flavors in different directions. But yeah, I think when I think fruity, I think New England style IPA, hazy style.
Yeah. Well, Vito, hop selection is obviously critically important for all of this. For example, I've had Stan Hieronymus on a number of times, and he said most of the European hops have very low levels of thiols, so you're pretty much limited to using U.S. hops as well as the New Zealand and Australian hops, which are derived from U.S. hops, are generally more desirable here. But can you talk a little bit about hop selection and which hops have not only the thiols, because you can't just have thiols, you got to have things like linalool and geraniol and other compounds that aid in this biotransformation process. Can you tell us about what specific hops you found kind of work best with this whole technique?
Yeah, so I think the best thing to do is have a blend, right? You want some of these, like you said, these other compounds in there, geraniol, lineol, et cetera, and then also those thiol precursors as well. So blends, there's good candidates for high impact in the brewing process. So like the Thiols, Citra, Sabro, Idaho 7, those are all, even Centennial, are great combinations for this. Then some of the others like Amarillo, Cascade, Azaka are not as much full of these precursors. But again, it's kind of creating that blend. So a lot, at least I always try to do like 3 different hops. It's like the rule of 3 is what I like to do, and kind of picking those. But Thiols, Citra, Sabro, Mosaic, Idaho 7, El Dorado is another great one. For survivables, yeah.
Almost all the New Zealand and Australian hops do well, I think, right?
Yeah, as well as all the they've got that super fruity aroma that comes from it, and then as we dug in deeper, it's like, oh, that's because they have these thiol precursors.
Have you looked at the hop survivability guide? I think that was it Yakima put out, I believe.
Yes, that has been a
good guideline, I find.
Yep.
Well, Chris, what has been your experience combining all of these techniques? The high thiol hops, the Phantasm booster, the thiol enhancing yeast to enhance the biotransformation.
So I'm kind of one of these fans of knowing which input is making which change. Yeah. So I've drank examples where they've had all 3, and you're like, whoa, like this is it's hard to know, and it's pretty incredible. It's not my favorite beer style, so I don't want 5-10 gallons of that beer at home.
Yeah.
But going to club meetings or going to breweries where I've known, okay, they're experimenting with this. But in homebrewing, obviously, we've been using these hops for a long time. This isn't the first time we've been using them, and we all know like some stick out more than others when it comes to that fruity flavor.
Sure.
So I haven't done a ton of experiments, but I'm really looking forward to Vito's coming up, the one he just brewed, because I've tasted that beer several times, and that's a rarity in homebrewing, right? Like I tasted it for him as a homebrewer before he started the brewery, then commercial examples as he had the brewery, and now get to try it where he's using 2 out of 3. And we'll have to push him to make that same beer with 3 out of 3 to see what that changes.
Wow. Yeah. So Vito, I think you've actually tried some of these as well with all three techniques, right?
Yeah, I've had some. And like I said, they're, just huge fruit, aroma side, which then transfers into the flavor. Yeah, I mean, really like almost dominating. When you use the thiolized yeast with the phantasm, with the proper hops. Yeah, if you're going for that like huge fruit aroma, then great way to go. I like blending in some of the other, danky, piney, and kind of really expressing different aromas all together in there. But it's an amazing way to add fruit flavors to your beer, especially the New England styles like we're talking about. But I think I love the experimenting with them on other styles as well.
Interesting. Well, Vito, we've covered a lot of the hop aspects, and I mentioned we did several episodes now with Stan Hieronymus on kind of related topics to this, specifically related to the hops themselves. But where can people learn more about things like Phantasm Booster and specific yeast strains that we're talking about here?
Well, first I'd say our product pages. We put a lot of information into there. We also do videos, and we have articles on those. So go to morebeer.com. But outside sources, you had cited Yakima Chief's survivable graph. That's a great one, and some of the information in there about these different compounds, how to mix them. I check out Yakima Chief's website as well.
Yeah, they have. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said to add to that, I think we're at like that kind of the entry level of this, and I think we're about to see a whole bunch more come out of this, more experiments, more lab work. To really understand it better. But I would watch Yakima Chief as well as Omega, because I think they're kind of leading the charge in understanding it better.
Yeah, I just want to say a few words about the survivability guide. Yakima publishes a survivability guide on their website. I think I've written about it in my blog as well. I'm sure you have as well, but has some very interesting information on it in terms of which yeast are best to use in the whirlpool and which are best to use dry hopping to help the aromas from the yeast survive the overall brewing process, right, Vito?
Correct, exactly.
So it's a very good resource when you're selecting hops to try and pick which ones do I need in the whirlpool, which ones will do best dry hopping, and which ones perhaps I should avoid. So, anyways, Chris, I was hoping to get your closing thoughts on this particular topic. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, here's the deal. If you love that tropical fruit aroma and flavor, you now have some new tools in your tool belt to really accentuate them. And that's pretty exciting because in close to 25 years of brewing, it's always just been like, well, add some more hops at the end or dry hop, and maybe that'll help. And now trying to understand it a little bit better in terms of how we're creating those. And like you just said, I think, starting to understand that not just, add these three things and you'll bring them out. It's, okay, I really want that hop. And like Vito said, a lot of times you're using 2 or 3. And now you're like, ooh, when do I add those 2 or 3? There are these survivables that work better in some instances and not in others. So learning the timing, learning, which ones you're going to use and when, you can really start designing beers pretty incredibly.
Yeah, the level of knowledge is certainly increasing. What the other thing I find cool here, Chris, is so much of this is available now at the homebrew level. Some of the stuff started out at the pro level and people were experimenting with it, but now really, the yeast and the additives and so on are all available at the homebrew level.
No, that's been one of our charges going forward. As soon as we heard about this Phantasm, we put an order in. It took a year to finally get it from New Zealand, but we put our order in like that first week. Like, we got to get this down to homebrewing because we know it's going to be a thing.
Yeah. Vito, what's your thoughts? I mean, you've played with this both as a professional brewer and as a home brewer.
Yeah, I think, it's always an exciting time, but I think it's an exciting time to be a brewer. I mean, there's so much new science coming out. What's really neat about it is like you've got, most commercial brewers start as home brewers, so the home brewing feeds the commercial brewing and vice versa, back and forth. Like we talked about, some of these, ALDC enzyme came out, is available on the commercial now. Now it's available on the home brewing level. phantasm, things like the amyglucosidase enzyme, all this, this high level science is working its way into homebrewing level, and they're kind of feeding each other. It's just really exciting. There's so much to learn about brewing, and there's so much we haven't learned yet. And every year it's like something new coming out. So, I mean, it's really exciting, experimentation, learning, it's a great process. I think we have the funnest hobby on earth. I'm a little biased, but it's a great time to be a brewer.
And I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but, there's also, I played with them at the homebrew meetings as well. There's aromatic drops you can add that have certain compounds that can enhance the aroma down too, right?
Yep.
Chris or Vito, I don't know if you're the one who want to jump in here.
Yeah, we've played, and we're actually a lot of that without adding bitterness, right? You're adding aroma and perceived bitterness without. Yeah, so it's really neat to see those.
Yeah,
as
essentially,
well.
As I understand it, they're aromatic oil extracts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, terpenes and things like that are just aromatic. Gives this perception of hops, but there's no like bitterness and things. And we're playing around with some of that too on some new kits.
Very cool. Well, Chris, did you want to mention anything else before we go? Any other things going on or related products, maybe?
No related products, but if you like this kind of stuff, this is the type of stuff Vito and I are doing every month on our YouTube channel. So if you got time and want to check out more, check us out on, you can go to morebeer.com and you can find our YouTube channel right on there.
Cool. And Vito, your final thoughts here, I guess?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Please
Pleasure.
check out our YouTube. Please check out our YouTube channel. We're doing some fun stuff. Love the interaction. The feedback is kind of driving the content we're creating. So looking forward to doing that. Looking forward to seeing everybody at HomebrewCon, and looking forward to tasting some beers made with Phantasm and some of these thiol boosting yeast at that event.
Well, thank you both for coming on today. Chris, really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks, Brad. Always appreciate coming on.
And Vito, first-time guest, but hope to have you on again soon.
Yes, thank you.
My guests today were Chris Graham and Vito Delucchi. Chris is president of MoreBeer, and Vito is their curator of content. And of course, both of them are longtime brewers. Thanks again for coming, Chris.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank
Vito?
you. Cheers.
A big thank you to Chris Graham and Vito Delucchi for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They offer access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com to get your subscription today. And Blickman Engineering has been the pioneer of nanobrewing, and they've helped hundreds of successful breweries achieve their dreams. Starting with one-barrel systems back in 2006, they now offer brew houses up to 15 barrels. They have cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and more, sized specifically for the nano brewer. Blickman Pro brewing systems are competitively priced without sacrificing quality. When you're ready to go pro, be sure to reach out to them at ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com. Again, that's ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com. And I recently updated the payment system for BeerSmith to make it easier for you to purchase or renew our BeerSmith desktop and web-based software. You can now purchase 2- and 3-year licenses at a discount, and you can use Venmo and Square for non-subscription payments. I'll also be announcing a BeerSmith 2 to 3 upgrade program shortly to make it easier than ever to upgrade. Check out our BeerSmith brewing software at BeerSmith.com. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.